Welcome to Education 333 and 337. I am Dr. Lori Benoit, and I am here to explore reading difficulties and disabilities to continue our study of literacy this semester. So, our objectives are to identify the factors that contribute to secondary student struggles with reading, examine strategies that teachers can use to help struggling readers access and understand text and develop a love for reading, reflect on how different content areas can help struggling readers engage with meaningful text, distinguish between students who exhibit reading difficulties and students who exhibit reading disabilities, and examine the connection between regular reading instruction and the achievement gap. So our essential question is, how can teachers utilize specific strategies to help all learners read, to broaden knowledge and access deeper levels of content and cognitive processing? So as a warm-up, I want you to consider your own experience with reading. What are your early memories of learning to read? Throughout your life, how has reading changed? Was there times where it was more pleasurable and times where it was more utilitarian? What kind of reading do you engage in at this point of your life? Do you or someone you know have a reading disability? What has your or their experience been like? And what are other associations that you have with reading? Some of us have very pleasurable experiences with reading. It came rather easy to us. The skill came pretty easy to us. And we also had a lot of support, whether that was home, school, or both. And it provided us a means to achieve what we wanted to and to access what we wanted to. Other students have not had such pleasurable memories and experiences with learning to read, especially if they have learning difficulties or disabilities. And that's what we're going to talk about is we don't, the majority of this course, of course, is intended to help you understand how students learn to read. But we cannot ignore the challenges that certain readers face. And that is something that we're going to discuss in this module. So I want you to consider this quote by Torgerson. The ultimate goal of reading instruction is to help children acquire the knowledge and skills necessary to comprehend printed material at a level that is consistent with their general language skills. So according to this quote, what's the goal of reading? It's to help children acquire knowledge and skills necessary to comprehend printed material. How could struggles with reading prevent a student from achieving this goal? Well, the problem is that if they're not able, for whatever reason, to gain that instruction that they need, then they could potentially have gaps in their knowledge and skills in certain content areas. And ultimately, the underlying assumption of this quote is that our students come with effective general language skills. If they don't come to us with effective general language skills, then it really compounds the problem because then their spoken and their experienced language is already deficient. And it's not at level to help them access printed material. So they will have a higher likelihood of having reading difficulties. So that's something to keep in mind when we consider what is the point of reading instruction and what are potential obstacles of that we encounter when we are trying to integrate reading instruction. So here's the difference between difficulties and disabilities. Some students have difficulties with reading, but that doesn't mean that they have a diagnosable disability. With extra help, remediation, more practice experiences, more time, and sometimes even strategic literacy interventions, these students with proper support can catch up and eventually achieve mastery in literacy proficiencies. However, other students have disabilities. These are formally diagnosed and they receive special education under a federal law called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. To outline the educational goals and services that students need to be successful, these students receive an IEP or an individualized education program. Some of you may have an IEP, maybe your children do, or maybe you work with students who do. These are sometimes learning disability, which are reading disability related, but there are other types of individualized education plans as well. This is not a special education class, but we are going to touch on those students who have special needs. You will learn all about IEPs, 504s, and all of those things in your special education courses. Characteristics of reading difficulties are students who have an over-reliance on guessing strategies. They often just seem like they're winging it. They may also have low language skills. So their verbal, their spoken language may also be a bit weaker. They have limited phonemic awareness and understanding of phonics. They're going to have memory problems sometimes. They have trouble retaining information, short and long term. They may read hesitantly or slowly, or maybe not at all. And this can sometimes be more aligned with their personalities or some other social and emotional characteristics than it actually has to do with their learning characteristics. They may have limited understanding about the text that they read. And so this could surface in multiple ways. These students often become frustrated and they avoid reading. In our secondary classes, this can show up a lot of different ways. Students sometimes will excuse themselves a lot. They need to go to the restroom if there are any extended reading tasks or read aloud tasks. These students sometimes pretend like they're sleeping. They oftentimes will try to be multitasking so that they don't even realize it, but it's kind of a coping skill. They'll focus on something else to kind of distract from their reading deficiencies. So these are characteristics. Helping these students is something that should be a regular part of every teacher's toolkit. So they struggle to read. So they're going to benefit from that explicit vocabulary building that we've talked about from the beginning of this course. Read alouds are very good opportunities for these students to practice their reading and to hear others read aloud as well. Teacher modeling fluent reading is very helpful for them. So these bullets really tap into the needs of our audible learners. All of our technology devices now make it very easy for students to access read aloud text or apps that they can put over text to read aloud to them. Teach these students how to use these. This is a very smart use of technology to support these students. Strategic use of literacy strategies, which we discussed last module, is very important for helping these students, giving them a toolbox of annotation techniques and acronyms that they can use to help structure their writing, sentence stems that they can use to help articulate their understanding in discussion. These are all very meaningful for our students who struggle to read or maybe have difficulty or just don't really enjoy it. Getting practice with reading and being held accountable for their reading is very important. Stimulating their reading passion and motivation by giving them some opportunities within your courses to self-select some of their reading is very important. And when we talk about reading practice and self-selected reading, chunk it. Put these tasks in smaller assignments for them. For example, reading an entire book or sometimes an entire chapter is overwhelming for these students, but breaking it down for them and giving them smaller reading tasks with immediately accessible assessments is something that can be very helpful for them. So engaging these struggling readers is also often challenging, but not impossible. When we are not good at something, we naturally don't want to engage in it. So helping readers who have difficulties is critical, but many times it takes a backseat to explicit skill instruction. So for example, what we oftentimes will do for these students is instead of giving them accessible text and helping them find answers themselves, we sometimes will simply give them the answers and make it sort of like a DOK 1 or 2 when we're thinking of Webb's depth of knowledge. So instead of helping them and supporting them through a challenging text to access answers themselves, we just give them the answers. There is a time for explicit instruction. but there is also a time to provide them with skill practice. And that's something that we want to make sure that we're not confusing or mixing those up. We must help them find material that interests them enough to overcome their reading difficulties. And so sometimes what this looks like is engaging other stakeholders. So for example, if we're doing a unit on something like an extended unit, maybe over the course of a quarter or even a semester, giving them an opportunity to self-select one book or a couple of articles, curating those, engaging the librarian and saying, hey, can you help me find some resources on this topic? Letting your students pick different topics that they can kind of become experts on and presenting them to their peers is a good way to get them engaged in the skill of reading and accessing knowledge, and also discussing it in a way that's meaningful. We have to provide support through regular reading practice and a wide range of activities. So we've mentioned a lot through the course, but do not grow reluctant to continue seeking out activities that would engage your students in reading. So here are some characteristics of disabilities. This is what it's not. So students, reading difficulty is who have disabilities. If they have an identified disability, it is not a result of an environmental, cultural, or economic disadvantage, not a difficulty acquiring English as a second language, not a motor disability, not a vision or hearing acuity problem, and not impaired cognitive function, okay? So reading disability is something that typically is divided into these three categories: a phonological deficit, which has to do with speech sounds; a processing speed or orthographic processing deficit, so letter and word recognition; and then a comprehension deficit, understanding what is read. So reading disabilities typically fall into those three areas. So for this activity, and this activity actually is going to lead you to the discussion forum that you're going to have this week, you're going to engage with these two resources. And as you engage with these two resources and another resource, keep these three things in mind. After you experience these simulations, consider what schoolwork could be like for a student with a reading or writing disability. Consider one strategy that teachers can use to support students with reading or writing disabilities. And what social emotional needs may students with reading disabilities have? So let's look at the dyslexia simulator first. It's hot linked here, but you can also go back into Moodle and see it. You can pull up this PowerPoint and see it. So if we look at the top paragraph, this is what our students with reading, with dyslexia experience reading like. So it's a representation. Of course, there are all different types. The bottom is the actual paragraph. So take just a moment and consider the struggle that reading is for them and what that could mean for other facets of academia, schoolwork. Could be a very frustrating situation. We're also going to look at this video. This is a dysgraphia simulator, and this is actually a really good video that tells us about there we go. Sorry, it's moving all over here.
In this module, you'll have an opportunity to experience what it's like to have a writing disability. The following exercise is designed to help you better understand what they might be going through and therefore transfer your experience in the next few minutes to planning for your students. Okay, so here's your task. I'm going to describe it and then we'll encourage you to pause your video to actually do the writing. So, I want you to write a short description of the image above. But please limit what you write to just 3 or 4 sentences using the following rules. Now keep in mind, our students with true writing disabilities would not be able to turn these rules on and off. We're just trying to simulate what they experience in their brain. So, keep these rules in mind. You're going to place the 3 words which you would want to begin each sentence at the end of that sentence without otherwise changing the word order. Use on in place of and in place of on whenever you write those combinations, both within words or alone. Place your concluding sentence at the top of the page, and without otherwise changing the spelling, place the letter H to the right of the letter T in all words that begin with T, and to the left in all words that end with T. So pause here and write your summary. You're back. How did it go? I'd like you to jot some reflections from this writing disability simulation. How did it feel? Were you perhaps cursing at the camera? Were you frustrated by your experience? The many times that I've done this with students, I do want to just share that the feelings are very powerful. And I don't know if you experience this, but certainly what we often see is that people realize, well, I wanted to write a lot more, but felt like it was too frustrating to follow those rules to actually get down what I wanted to say. Think about that, how that transfers to our students with writing disabilities. Or perhaps some of you got distracted. Maybe you decided not to do it and you gave up. Have you ever wondered why a child gave up so easily instead of thinking about how difficult the experience must be of having a learning or writing disability? Or perhaps you were someone who decided to pick up your phone and start texting, or something that perhaps would in a classroom look like chatting with the person next to you. How often do we, discipline or just draw attention to a student who has not been focusing, who doesn't have their pencil to the paper yet? Perhaps it's because they're just dealing with the demands of all of these factors that influence the brain of a child with a writing disability. I hope that you'll take your reflections and apply that to the next time you're working with a student who struggles with some of these challenges.
There are early signs of
All right, so that gives us an understanding of a little bit of dyslexia and dysgraphia. Both of these are common disabilities that we see with our students. And many times students who have reading disabilities, they have both of these that are identified. How to help students with reading disabilities is very dependent on what that IEP stipulates. So of course, everything that we've been talking about, how to support literacy, is going to be important for these students. But there are other measures that will need to be taken. You would need to work very closely with the student's special education teacher to ensure that you are doing everything you can to support that student. At the secondary level, some students with reading disabilities have actually transferred out of reading special services because the mitigation methods are now internalized. So the skills that these students learned in elementary school, they now don't need the support of a pull-out type of some sort of like a resource class is sometimes what we call them, or a study skills class or things like that. They don't need that anymore. Some of them still continue to need that support. However, they still may have an IEP. So we want to become aware of what types of supports they need, what types are going to be part of regular instruction, and what extra measures we're going to need to do to maintain those IEPs. I do want to remind you, you will have a special education class, but when we are dealing with students with individualized education plans, it is worth it to take the time to carefully read those plans to make sure that we're following them. Not only are they in the best interest of the child, but these are legal documents. And so we want to make sure that we're following those. We're going to take just a minute and we're going to look at this literacy best practices video. As you watch it, I want you to make note of some of these things. Identify as many literacy strategies as you can in this lesson plan. How do these strategies and explicit literacy instruction support all learners, including those with reading difficulties and disabilities? How does literacy instruction help narrow the achievement gap. So let's take just a moment and watch the video.
How many of you have ever come up against words you've never seen before and don't know how to pronounce? All right, let's be honest. How many of you have just skipped that word?
Social studies teacher Mary Catherine Keating is building knowledge through vocabulary. Because so many students come to this class with a range of reading skills, she knows the key to understanding content is through key words.
How many of you have done the reading assignment, skipped over those words, and had no clue what the reading said? So the words are the important part. When you're reading a nonfiction text, the words that you don't know, usually about 5% for most kids, those are the most important words, and they are the key to understanding the concept. So let's go get some of this 5%.
As Mary Catherine Keating and Robert Sebring team teach World History 2, they embed reading strategies throughout their lesson, from paired reading
Divine Right of Kings
to the use of word walls. These teachers help students master reading in the content area. The strategies are easily transferred to other reading the students may do.
Giovanni.
Attacking keywords and concepts start with what students know.
No phone after. Anybody have rules about their phone?
Apparently, I'm not allowed to text between 4.
So we began with an activity on their family and rules and who makes rules in the family, and then we moved it to the school and how you have a say and what you can do with those rules, and learning that sometimes, some rules are more structured. Come up with a definition for absolute.
100% positive.
Excellent.
everything.
All of everything. Oh, I like that. You give kids assigned words and vocabulary. A lot of the kids will just go to the back of the glossary and copy the definition and never work with the word.
And by definition, you have tight control if you're an absolute ruler.
Keating and Sebring introduce words to students in multiple ways. First, they begin by building background knowledge.
Anybody have any kids making the rules in the house?
Second, they want students to use words like a historian.
So we can put the time period where absolutism was successful.
And third, Keating and Sebring group key words so students can interact with vocabulary. They cluster words and terms into categories and explain their reasoning behind it. For example, students should know the difference between Oliver Cromwell and the Roundheads, and the difference between absolutism and an absolute monarch. Finally, as homework, students will answer open-ended questions, stressing the 5% of terms and phrases unique to their chapter of study.
In fact, right now, I'm assuming that you guys can do these two words, without looking them up.
The goal for these students is to become active readers. As they study their textbooks and assigned readings, students learn to identify text clues to answer questions, and even appreciate word walls.
All the reading, even, elementary, high school, middle school reading has said, put word walls in. This is the first year I'm doing it. I'm in the process of building it. My goal is by the end of the year, there's going to be words all over this classroom. And my idea is, as we move from unit to unit, I want the words to stay fresh in the mind.
Keating and Sebring recognize that reading levels vary in their class. They purposely pair students to read to one another.
Well, when people read out loud, it also builds confidence in them.
Able to listen for who is struggling with the reading so that we can pick that up and give them more assistance. Plus, the other thing we find is when they're paired reading, they tend to pay attention more.
Basically just highlighting main facts and things that summarize each paragraph, and then on the side we write a quick brief sentence or just a couple words to summarize each paragraph.
Mary Catherine Keating and Robert Sebring weave reading strategies into their high school social studies classroom because it supports student learning for everyone. They know that as students progress in their education, the reading they encounter becomes much more complex. Yet some teachers seldom teach students how to deal with increasingly complex text, and thus a learning gap begins to emerge. The explicit instruction of reading strategies for complex text of each content area is the main tool toward content mastery.
Does it take time? Yes. But the time that it takes me to develop these strategies, I gain at the end of the year because I don't have to review as much because the kids have internalized a lot of it. They've made it their own.
These read strategies are very useful. In the end, you could just like look back, like if you're looking for something like, okay, what are the rulers of temp? That's right there. Or what do they do for power? That's right there. Or it's easy to find.
We don't have it in different classes. I don't know why, because it's such a...
Excellent. So there were lots of literacy strategies that were embedded in that particular video. And right at the end, the narrator addresses how literacy instruction helps to narrow the achievement gap. As our students progress through middle school into high school, the text does become increasingly challenging. And if we're not giving them tools to navigate that challenging text, this is how especially students with reading difficulties and disabilities, the gap just grows for them. The achievement gap grows. So it's something that we want to be aware of, and we really want to spend time cultivating. So as final thoughts, we want to make sure that we're supporting students with reading difficulties and disabilities, even though it can be challenging. We have specific strategies that can target these students' needs. Effective literacy instruction that supports students with reading difficulties and disabilities actually helps all students, even our advanced readers, develop greater reading proficiencies. So when we teach to those students who have disabilities and difficulties, we're actually lifting up the whole class. Consistent, explicit literacy instruction is key to supporting students who have reading difficulties and disabilities. And teachers should collaborate with key literacy stakeholders, such as literacy coaches, instructional coaches, parents, special education teachers, to develop strategic literacy plans for students with reading difficulties and disabilities. Here are our resources for this particular module. And I hope you have a great time exploring more about literacy in the course and more about helping all readers, including those who have difficulties and disabilities.